Welcome to Philosophy Podcasts. I'm August Baker. Philosophy Podcast is where we interview leading philosophers about their recent books. Today, I'm very pleased to be speaking to Christopher Bollas on everyone's list of one of the most influential or important psychoanalytic thinkers around. Not only a psychoanalytic thinker, also a psychoanalyst, and that's not all, also a former English professor and a cultural critic, and as we'll see today, also novelist, playwright, poet, I guess. And today we're talking about Christopher's book, Conversations, just recently out, which is, I think, a book of fiction. Welcome, Christopher.
Hello. Good to be here.
Thank you. I wanted to jump right into one of the, so this book has 23 short pieces. I don't know whether you'd call them little plays or little poems. And I wanted to just jump right into one of them, which was the most emotional for me, I guess, that called Customer Relations. And I'd summarize it for the listeners as someone who has a complaint and feels he's been cheated, I would say maybe betrayed, and he goes to customer service. He has a receipt saying that he bought something, but he can't quite articulate what exactly he needs help with, except that he has this feeling of being cheated. And what can he say about this feeling? Well, he knows that his father hated banks and his father hated lenders, and he just isn't able to say much more, but he wants some sort of relief. He doesn't expect it. And to me, what was really emotional about this piece was that he runs into this man or I assume it's a man. I don't know. I don't think it's specified. To me, it was a young man who is the customer service representative, and he's really trying to help him, and he really does. He kind of has to, at one point he says, may I wonder out loud about what is going on? And later he says, he jumps in and says, you were misled. Maybe you were misled. He wants to really help him, and he does. And he provides him more relief than the man expected. I was really touching. That would be my description of it.
I think it's a good description. I think where this comes from, in a way, is just the history of both being on the other end, the customer relations chap's end of the situation, and being a customer. I think my first job was when I was 9 years old. I worked in a place called the Chicken Shack in Laguna Beach, and I washed dishes, and then I graduated to making salads, and then I got to go out and actually meet the customers. Then later, in my mid-adolescence, I worked in a place called the Pottery Shack, and there you simply would take people around to look for pottery. And from there to other jobs, and eventually working in bookstores. And I managed a bookstore in San Francisco when I was at Berkeley. And it was fascinating because one never quite knows if someone's coming up to one and you're sitting behind that desk or behind the cash register, and you get a request for something like, well, I can't remember the name of this book, but it has something to do with a forlorn young man who thought his father had been unjustly killed by. Might that be Hamlet? Oh, yes, that's it. Hamlet. What's that about? So you don't quite know when folks come up to you what they're going to ask you about or for or whatever. And I've always been interested in conversations between people who know nothing about each other, for whom it's just a conversation. It will be brief. Sometimes there will be a request, perhaps a complaint, something. And you, the person behind the counter, is the designated helper, or whatever we want to call us, always in customer relations one way or the other. And It can be a very easy situation, or it can be quite difficult. You can have people sitting in front of you or standing who are having an argument over what to buy or not to buy. So it's complex.
Mm.
I have found, in a way, the encounters between strangers, people who don't know each other, always interesting. And of course, ubiquitous. We're always meeting people we don't know from Adam. We will never see them again, but we can have some remarkable moments with a stranger. Then, if we scroll forward a bit in time to the era of the cell phone, and if you're in an airport lounge, I'm sure you've been through this. We've all been through it. Before the cell phones and then after the cell phones. Before the cell phones, you basically sat in the lounge and read newspapers or whatever and got lost in daydreams. That wasn't possible as time went on with folks around you having these intense conversations with different people. And sometimes uh, in an airport lounge, two or three people would be in auditory proximity to me, and I would be hearing them talking to different people. So it was kind of like operatic in its own way. And I made a decision of sorts. I mean, one could either get just cross about this, move chairs, and just rant about it, or say, wait a minute, this is kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting. And so I sort of eavesdropped. I mean, I heard these conversations, just one part of the conversation. And they could be very intense, very interesting. And I'd kind of imagine who the other person was on the other end of the line and what were they thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
So there was something about it that was theatrical. There was a theater piece to this. I'd always been, of all the existential plays I think I read, the one that maybe affected me more than others, although that's a risky thing to say, but was The Bold Soprano. So I thought Ionesco had that. I know he wrote that for very different reasons than the ones that interested me. But what intrigued me was the fact that the two are riding in a carriage, in a metro carriage, having a conversation, man and a woman, and they get into talking to each other. And only toward the very end of the play do they realize they're husband and wife.
Mm.
So I just thought that was fascinating. And I love the way existential playwrights brought in conversation into their plays as an idiom in its own right. So when I titled this book Conversations, I really meant it as a form that is not, I think it's a form of theater. It's also a form of poetry. It's also verbal prose. It's got many different dimensions in it, conversation. But I don't think it's been studied in its own right.
Mm.
To which we then add internal conversation, how we talk to ourselves, which I think is one of the most interesting challenges we still face in the world of psychology and philosophy. I don't think, with respect, that any of the great philosophers who had a go at this, Vygotsky, one of them, Georges Bataille, another, I don't think that they made it. I don't think that their ability to flesh it out and address it and speak to it and make it come alive as a topic was successful. But they did try, and I think we do need to keep trying to see if we can find some way for all of us to talk about what that is that goes on inside us when we're talking to ourselves.
I want to touch on the airport, of course. Sometimes these conversations, even though there was someone you don't know, can be extremely emotional. Like when you get to the airport and you can't get on the flight and you've had a bad couple of weeks and there's this person saying you can't get on. I mean, it can be much more emotional than any conversation you've had with someone that you don't really know, that you do know well. Or, it's just, it can be really traumatic and memorable. I've had that happen to me. Isn't that strange that these interactions with complete strangers end up being so hurtful?
They can be very hurtful, or they can be strangely wonderful. They are, call it, let's just say it's average, unexpectable predictability. You can't predict it. You cannot predict what's going to happen. So, but I think we live, don't we, with the illusion of safety, that we're safe, that the world is safe. That was the point that a wonderful psychoanalyst, Joseph Sandler, used to make. uh, Joe Sandler thought that no, that the core necessity for all human beings was not ego stability per se, or the other criteria that analysts would use to determine well-being. He said that the core need in all of us was to feel safe,
Mhm.
that was the fundamental need. So I suppose we walk about in the world with the illusion that it's a good place, that we're
Mm.
safe, until something shows up to say, not quite right. And one of the things that can be shocking to us is an unpleasant verbal encounter with an absolute stranger.
Yeah.
Takes us by surprise because, in a certain sort of way, there aren't many real rules for conversation. I mean, we think we may have, rules for conversing, the protocol of conversation, etc.
Right.
And not really. It's, I think, perhaps more clearly seen in China. I wrote a book on China, which I
Hmm.
found interesting to research because I didn't know, I should have, that although they shared the same language throughout China, um, the dialects were so different that even people living within miles of each other, if they traveled to their villages, they couldn't understand one another, even though they spoke the same language. They wrote it. They would write to one another. They took these little tablets, and if they wanted something, if it was a commercial transaction, they would write it down and read each other. So the Chinese language evolved very, very quickly and complexly because they couldn't comprehend one another verbally. So they're,
Oh,
yeah. So I found that interesting, that they couldn't, and so therefore the Chinese are relatively silent vis-a-vis one another. They're not a verbal people. They don't believe a lot in speech because in a way they there's only a limited number of people who could ever have understood you in the first place if you'd opened. And guess what? They probably are mostly family and
yeah.
local villagers. So I mean, what's to say after a while there? I mean, before you dive into the internal world and go
Mm.
internal conversation. So there are many forums of conversation, so many different places in which it takes place. And I love the encounter between absolute strangers. So some of these short pieces, and I don't know what to call them because they're not
Right.
poems, they're not drama pieces, they are conversations.
Hmm.
But some of them I imagine as just two people sitting on the underground together.
Right.
One person turns because they're bored. They don't know. And so one person says something out of the blue to another. And the question then becomes, well, do you respond or do you pretend like you didn't hear it? When in fact, it's pretty clear someone has just spoken to you.
Right.
And I find that moment, that potential space, funny. I just find it humorous.
Right. And
You know?
sometimes in these pieces, you're starting to figure out what you think the situation is, and you think you know it in after stanza two, and then something happens in stanza three, and you realize that's not it at all. I thought this was someone climbing into an airline seat, and I realized it's must be something completely different.
Yeah, yes, I think it's wonderful how we're orchestrated by the reality of conversation. How we think we know where we're going, but if the person is a little bit off or a little bit coming from an angle we just didn't comprehend, it's going to be an interesting ride. It can be a very interesting ride, and of course, this bears on psychoanalysis because analysts sit there. It is a form of conversation, and with obvious agendas to it. And one of the ambitions is to see to what extent this internal conversation that we have inside can be externalized. To what extent can it be portrayed, represented, expressed between two people in the room? So you are, in a sense, creating the illusion that you are inside each other's minds, that there is some sort of collaboration going on here, made possible perhaps by the ordinary art form, let's say, of conversation itself. So we borrow from that and say, okay, here's the Freudian conversation. Tell you what, I'm going to be quiet and just listen to you. And as I listen to you, I'm hearing from another part of you than you will be able to hear from. So I'm going to hear from it. And when I get enough of the language, the discourse, the speech, I will tell you what I've heard.
Right.
But when I tell you what I've heard, I'm telling you what I think you have said to yourself. So this is you speaking to yourself, and I'm simply the auditor of that in a way.
Mhm.
So perhaps this is echo of customer relations, which you brought up.
Mhm.
The customer shows up at customer relations, and it's that in that moment more like an analytical session. Why are you here? He can't tell. He doesn't know. Suddenly, he has no idea why he's there.
That's certainly true. Right.
Yeah, and that's also true for another number of folks in psychoanalysis. Why are you? Well, I've been
In fact,
here.
yeah,
Yeah,
why are you here? I don't really know, but I'll make up something because I'm not really sure, but I want to have a story. So here's a story that'll get us started.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You start off with something, and
Right.
and before you know it, the narrative has its own logic to it. You have no idea why you're saying what you're saying. And then you realize, well, you don't really need to because the unconscious has its own discourse. So you just keep talking.
Right. Another one that really touched me was called Looking Through the Window. The speaker narrator is at the butcher, and this happens a lot. You hear a child say something that's just brilliant and
Mm.
out of place, but completely memorable. The young boy in this example says in the butcher, "Mom, what has happened to the animal?" And then later, "Mom, the animal has exploded." This sort of thing happens quite a bit where you hear a kid say something that you just are charmed by and also see some real truth in. Um, it was very touching just for that. And then it also, um, well, it's about, I guess, loss of innocence. You think about this boy coming to realize things about the world, and then it relates it to later. The piece relates it to from my perspective, related it to other things like the way soldiers might be thought of as they're cannon fodder, right? They're also exploded like animals are. And at the very end, there's this the narrator doesn't stops going to the butcher for a while, goes to the fishmonger, but then comes back. And that seemed to me also poignant because it does seem to me that so often we see something. Well, I actually used to live next to a meat market, and I would see all these cows lined up, and I wouldn't eat meat then for a very long time. And but then when I moved away and I sort of forgot about it, then I went back, and it just reminds me of how we need these we need a moral principle to sort of like be right in our face, at least a moral principle like that to be right in our face, to really be occupied by it, whether it's war or I was thinking people are in prison who, when we don't see them, they're gone. Who's thinking about them, right?
Mm.
So it combined the insights of a child and then the way that we let our moral, for me, the way we let our moral principles, we sort of let them subside and forget about them.
Yes, that's very well put. I think the piece ends with the character going back to the butcher shop, and I think it ends with him saying something like, "And so he then entered Iraq."
Yeah.
So I wrote this during the Iraq War. In fact, most of the conversations were written during the Iraq War. Some buddies and I, we'd meet up for breakfast every morning and talk about life. And we were talking about the war. Interesting. That's also conversations.
Yes.
Meeting with three of my friends for breakfast every morning. And I think our conversations were very helpful to process the distress we were all experiencing over the obvious fact that we were going to war with Iraq when they didn't have nuclear weapons. There was no real threat, and yet we were helpless to do anything about it. The butcher shop, I think, when it came to mind, struck me, of course, as a place where the killing of the object is clear. These have been slaughtered. They are hanging in the window. If you walk into the butcher shop, especially in Hampstead where I lived, and I loved the butcher shop there, but when you walked in, it was unmistakable, a place where slaughter had taken place. Okay. We, of course, through ordinary splitting, managed to live with this kind of reality all the time without even really thinking about it. But I decided to make use of it as a metaphor of the reality that we are slaughtering people thousands and thousands of miles away from the United Kingdom, thousands of miles away. We know we're slaughtering them, but we don't have to see it. So in that respect, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. Now, for this character in that particular conversation, he can't, in a way, recover from the child's statement, the child's question, and thus he abandons his wish to go into this. But here, a child asks a very simple question that children would indeed ask of adults who are going to war, who are slaughtering each other. Why are you doing this? Why is this happening? I don't think we've got a very good answer to these questions, because we are vicious beasts. I will say this, when I was a boy, well, I think I was probably, I guess, 15. I was at the state track meet. It was in San Diego, and I had just done I'd come dead last in the 100 meters from my county, going back to the car with my coach, his arm around me, separating, went to get to the car. And I saw a group of kids sort of standing in front of a motor vehicle, not far from our car. And I was sort of transfixed because they had pool clubs in their hands. And I thought there was some strange kind of dance, like there were 3 or 4 pool cues. In fact, they were killing another boy.
Oh my
and
God.
I saw part of his brain splattered.
Oh my God.
My coach pulled me by the back of not the neck, but the back of my athletic outfit over the hood of a car, because I was standing in front of the car. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. He pulled me over the hood of the car, back around. We crouched down and we got back to our motor vehicle, which was in the next row of cars, and we drove away. Mm. And when we drove back to Laguna Beach, nobody said anything in the car. None of us. And we never talked about it again. Mm. And I looked in the newspaper. I couldn't find anything in the newspapers about it. It was a racial killing. And then what did I do? I forgot about it. I mean, I went on living. Right. You live by the beach, by the sea. You see people die. You see people drown. Death is definitely around. You see it. And I did see it. And then I trained to be a lifeguard. I didn't actually do it officially because I played baseball during the summers, but I would go down and help out during days when the surf was just too big and lots of people the lifeguards needed help. My buddies needed help. So locals would go down and help out. So we saw some pretty disturbing things as children. And I'm sure there are other groups of children in other realms of life where they also see these bits of reality that urbanites may not see so much. So I think we protect ourselves against violence. We protect ourselves against our murderousness. Yeah. The conversations in this book have no doubt been influenced by the children I worked with at the East Bay Activity Center in Oakland.
That's a good point, right?
Yeah, because they were some that had come out of autism and were speaking, but the questions they would ask us, especially in 1968 when I was there, if you can imagine, here you are working with 25 children. Martin Luther King has been killed in April. Yeah. Robert Kennedy is murdered in June. And the children are turning to us because we are meant to be the exemplars of sanity and of that which they're aiming to adapt, to become like us. Suddenly, they're looking at us with the questions: why is this happening? Why? And we'd had answers for so many things before, but for this, no. And with helicopters flying over our school to drop mustard gas on students at Berkeley, at People's Park, no. It was kind of like a war zone. That's when reality then didn't obey the custom of our imagination. It's not supposed to behave like that. It's supposed to be friendly and adaptive and fine. But no. So what do we do when we see something like that? I don't know the answer to that, but um, there's this wonderful film, Jonathan Franzen's film about Auschwitz and the camp next to Auschwitz, the run by the commandant of Auschwitz. Extraordinary film about how people running the camp, running Auschwitz, are acting as if there's absolutely nothing odd about what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's intriguing.
I did wonder, I saw that you had worked with autistic children, and I recently had I teach swimming lessons. I teach kids how to swim, and I've recently have some customers who are non quote unquote nonverbal autistic. I I still end up communicating with them. Does the word conversation, does their lack of conversation, does that have meaning for you in terms of autism? Is that something that one is not able to do?
Not in, well, if they're back in the 60s when it was just being diagnosed, really, 1950s and 60s, the autistic child was a child who did not speak at all.
Right.
And so some of the children at the school where I worked, there were 25 or so kids, never spoke. In fact, two of them never spoke. I was only there 2 years, and my children, the two kids I worked with, had been autistic, but were speaking. They were going through what was called the symbiotic phase. So part of going through the symbiotic phase was that kids could be quite violent. And I had a hefty kid who was physically intimidating, and he would pummel other children and try to, create mayhem in the shop and elsewhere. He was terrified, but he was also hefty and he could hurt people.
Yeah.
So I'd have to take him out onto the into the playground and sit on the grass with him and hold him until he was calm enough to go into the school. That was really difficult. I mean, not because once I had him on the ground and holding him, he didn't resist. He was all right, but it was really uncomfortable, very soggy and wet and damp.
I can imagine. Yeah.
So out of nowhere, I said, "Would you like to hear about the orange ship?" And he said, "Who's the captain?" So I think that the orange ship may have come from the fact that our favorite song in the school was Yellow Submarine. We would sing the Yellow Submarine, and all of us would be singing it together, the children, the staff, all of us. So maybe that's where the orange ship came from. I don't know. Yeah. So he then took, can we just sit in the bench, on the bench? Yes, of course. So we sat on the bench,
Right.
And then he'd come through the gate in the morning and he'd be yelling, "Orange ship, orange ship." So we'd go out and sit on the bench, and then we'd talk about the orange. I would say the ship is now in Athens and we're doing this. And we're looking at the part, and he'd say, "The boys have gotten off the ship and so-and-so's being eaten by an alligator and this has been picked up by a giant bird." I'd say, "All right, that's your version. Mine is this." So this went on week after week, month after month for about 5 months or so, 6 months. And then he looked at me and he said, and he called me Chris Ball. He said, "Chris Ball, I'm joking. I'm joking." And I didn't know what he was talking about. And he said, "I'm kidding you." So he'd been telling me about the alligators doing this and that. And it was no longer true. He accepted.
Wow.
I don't
So powerful.
know. It was powerful. I learned a lot. I don't know what I learned.
Right.
I don't know what I learned. I only know that it was extremely important. I wish I would live another 100 years. Maybe I'd be able to learn about that. I don't know why that was so transformative.
It felt like you had been able to reach him in a way that he maybe hadn't been reached much before. Is that fair?
I think it's fair. I think the reality we were living in, which was the story, the narrative provided an alternative space. It wasn't right in front of us. It was somewhere else. It was a boat, the Mediterranean.
Yeah, well, maybe the swimming pool is also an alternative space. We're certainly focused on something else. We're focused on him staying above and learning how to swim and jumping in and things like that.
Oh, yeah. And the swimming pool was one of the most frightening places for us to go.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wrong. Not frightening, challenging.
Hmm.
Challenging. Because with the autistic kids, one of the problems would be when they put their foot in the water up to their, let's say, up to their knee, they were insistent that the lower part of their body, the leg, was bent. It was being destroyed
Oh.
by the water. Mhm.
Hmm.
So we couldn't persuade them to go further into the water because, from their point of view, it would destroy their body. So
Wow.
they, yeah. So we didn't force them, of course, and we would go to the baby pool or whatever, and maybe they would splash in it. You see, but that had to do with perception, and autistic kids had these perceptual issues. But interestingly enough, those perceptual issues could be resolved.
Hmm.
Ego psychologists would have said, well, that's the maturational process. Get them back moving and they mature naturally. The maturational process is simply organic. We evolve. We'll get there if there's nothing interfering with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how we
Right.
looked at, and it sort of proved to be the case that they
Right.
could develop. And the same with perspective. Do you have time for another vignette?
Oh, yes, please.
Hey, it's the children, a lot of them the airplanes would come over the school. They'd fly over. And of course, when flying over the school, the planes would be quite large. Then they would descend towards Oakland Airport, which is about 4 miles away. And they would get smaller as they got further away. So some of the children thought that as you got toward the airport, there was a giant shrinking machine that would shrink the plane. And so the children would not ride in the car with their parents by the airport, and they would get terrified.
Hmm.
So, so this had to do with perception, of course, with that. So one boy, one day, not my patient, who had this issue, ran across the playground and came up to me and said, "Chris is big," ran away. "Chris small," runs back. "Chris big," runs back. "Chris
Wow.
small," and he's jumping up and down with joy.
He figured this out.
He figured it out.
Yeah.
He could see it. His terror, it was gone. But you tell me what happened? I'm sorry, I can't tell you.
No. Right.
I just don't know.
Right.
But the therapeutic process, if we can call it that, it's wonderful. Something happens when two people dedicate themselves to spending time trying to understand each other.
Yes. Yeah. Or even trying to do something else, like learn how to swim or teach you how to swim. That just you end up understanding each other, right? And someone who's not a family member somehow jumpstarts things in a way,
Yeah.
according to the family members. There was another piece that really got to me was called "Do I Look Stupid?" It was more kind of funny, but I don't know. It's about someone who wanted to know if he looks stupid and wants to ask someone who he doesn't know, tell me the truth. Do I look like someone who is stupid? And the other person has all the various responses you might think, not wanting to answer or not understanding or why me. And I don't know. I've thought a lot about this one. I'm not sure why it affected me so much, but I kept thinking, maybe this morning I was just thinking it's this, my theory as of this morning was that it's this belief that somehow you're going to ask somebody something and they're going to, you have this maybe paranoid suspicion about yourself that you're this, and you're going to go find someone who's actually going to clarify it for you or confirm it for you. I don't really know why, but I kept thinking about that one. Do I look stupid?
I
You know?
think it's a wonderful question. I think the character in conversation is determined to ask this question of an absolute stranger
Yeah.
who's irritated, increasingly irritated, bewildered, and doesn't know what to do. And then he realizes that unless he answers this man's question, he can't get rid of him. But the man promises that he will accept the judgment. It's just all his life he's wanted to know whether he looks stupid or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the character says, "Yes, you look stupid." That's the end of it. Now it ends with that final judgment.
Yeah.
I think the risk here is the risk of anyone taking some precious doubt, some concern or worry about the self, and we all have them, and deciding, okay, I'm going to ask someone about this, and they do, or if they do, I mean, it would be very rare, I think, they get this sort of straight answer, which confirms their worst fear. I
Yeah.
mean, are my ears too big?
Right.
Are my ears too big? Do I really have to answer? Yes, they are. And then that's it. And oh, my ears are too big. So we all have these sort of, let's call them narcissistic doubts. We all have these vulnerabilities. And so do we tend to keep them to ourselves? We tend to just coach ourselves and say, don't worry, you're fine, or whatever we say. The core question this man wants is derived clearly from a condensation of many experiences as a kid, as an adolescent, as an adult. So he's clearly carrying a hell of a burden inside him. So there's something terribly sad, it seems to me,
Yeah,
about this.
there is.
Yeah. And he's meeting with an ordinary businessman or something on his
Mm-hmm.
way to, who's got to get to the underground and can't take this anymore. He's asking, we could say he's asking the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Mm-hmm.
What a strange thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
You have something.
Yeah, no, he there was one point where he says, I'm not, the strangers, I'm not going to do this. This is ridiculous. And he says, he kind of tells the businessman or whatever the narrative or the motivation. He says, I told myself, go on, ask someone, and I did. And the businessman says, well, so what? Having suffered this view all my life, at last I asked someone. And the businessman, that's not my fault. I did not ask for this question. But he gets to him. He says, this was a big deal for me to ask this. I've been waiting a long time to ask this. And that seems to me what moved the businessman to finally answer him. The way I read it was, oh, okay, so this is really important to you and you really want to know the answer and you've been waiting a long time. And once he was presented in that way, I thought he wanted to answer it. And in a way he did.
Yes, I think what happens there is that the man's sincerity, it imposes itself on the stranger.
Mm.
And it's clear to him that this chap is serious. And so he answers the question. I suppose the irony is, or an irony is, that you would have to be rather stupid to do what this man did. I mean, if we think about it, who would ever walk up to someone on the street and say, I've got a question. Do I look stupid? I mean, one could say, well, it's a hell of a stupid question.
Yeah.
Or only a stupid person would ask a question like that. But the person doesn't. He's irritated and he doesn't want to answer it. But I suppose I don't know if one can anticipate what the answer is going to be. I wouldn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
The readers will be able to see where this is going or how it will end. And that's partly a feature of some of these conversations, is you don't quite know where this is going,
right,
how will it end. And some of the conversations have no ending, really.
Right.
They just break off, or they're unsuccessful conversations. They don't lead to anything of meaningful at all.
Or I guess as you're speaking about it, I think if the stranger had answered it, no, or it's complex,
Mm-hmm.
the guy would have found someone else to ask. That wouldn't have been a good enough answer. He must have been lying or being nice. So we have these 23 pieces. And then what else? I was thinking about this, another swimming reference. I had a 4-year-old the other day, the first lesson wasn't doing well. And afterwards, the mom said of her daughter that her concern was that she said she couldn't touch the bottom when in the swimming. And I thought, if you just had these 23 pieces, the reader may not be able to touch the bottom. Like they're not really sure where they are here. And so to me, there are these other 3 things in here. First of all, there's the endorsements on the back. There are these endorsements on the back.
Yes.
There's the little blurb in the front, and there's an afterword or an afternote that you wrote that kind of situate it for the reader in terms of what your intentions, what the author's intentions were here.
Hmm.
And I feel like when I was reading these, I wanted to read them, but I also thought, why do I need to know what these other people thought, or why do I need to have an interpretation of what Christopher Bollas is doing here? Why wouldn't I just read it by myself? But it is kind of a floating feeling without it.
I think that's a really good critique. And if I could do the book again in a way, I think I would probably remove that note at the end. I don't think it helps to have it. Why did I include an afternote that referred to the war in Iraq, etc.? Well, I think I wanted to try and I wrote these conversations some years ago. So I guess, situating them in time and giving them this political context. But I don't think it's got anything at all to do, frankly, with these conversations. It's in a way, it's misleading.
Mm.
So I think it's a mistake. And I think, it's apt that you picked it up. So yeah.
The other thing is, I think that I kept thinking about is, and we conversed a little bit about this beforehand, is so in the endorsements we have Anish Kapoor, who's a British Indian sculptor, I believe, who says his endorsement is Bollas invites the fascinating possibility that psychoanalysis is akin to poetic conjecture. Why am I here? What are we doing in this room together? I don't know. I don't know. Could it be? Why me? Etc. It just occurred to me, and I did this also when I was reading it. I kept thinking, I was aware that Christopher Bollas is a psychoanalyst and a psychoanalytic theorist. And then afterwards, I kept thinking, I was trying to think, you were in the situation of someone, for example, a trans man who says, I don't want to be referred to as a trans man. I just want to be referred to as a man. And in a way, it's difficult for you to be a novelist or a playwright without everyone trying to read in you being a psychoanalyst also. It's like, can you take me as just this, as what, as this? Do you have to read in all these other things that you know about me? I don't know it felt to me like that would be frustrating for you.
Well, I don't think the fact that I'm a psychoanalyst means a heck of a lot here. I mean, maybe it does. I don't know. I'm not the one. In a way, I'm not the one to judge that. The part of me that wrote these conversation, it's an old part of me that goes back
Right.
prior to my psychoanalytical training and literary interests as an adolescent. I wrote plays when I was at Berkeley and other things like works of fiction. None of them survived. There was a fire in my garage, and
Oh my God.
all my childhood belongings and plays, all that went up in smoke. So, but life goes on, and I did, but I never wrote fiction again after that. Not until the early part of this century in London. Just one day, I just started writing a play. Yeah, but I don't think that these are. Well, I'm not the one. I'm not. I wouldn't.
Right.
I need to think further about your comment. I don't know to what extent my being a psychoanalyst has contributed to the book. I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean,
My thought was that it might be frustrating. To me, people want to know about my past because I'm older, and when I'm doing something, they want to know about my past, and I'm kind of like, do I need to tell you about my past? Can you just take me where I am right now without having to? So my thought was that your being a psychoanalyst doesn't have anything to do with this, and you might be frustrated that people are trying to read in and interpret your work in terms of your background in psychoanalysis, and you might prefer them to not do that.
yes, that's true. I would, but I think I have always regarded my life as an English professor as a separate reality.
Yeah.
I've not seen it as part of psychoanalysis, and I've also seen psychoanalysis as very much its own world.
Yeah.
I've liked the differences between them. So these are not metaphors for psychoanalytical engagement,
Right.
these conversations. They aren't. And although I do think that psychoanalysis is part of the use of conversation, of conversational idiom, it's a very particular type of conversation and a very unique one. It's a project. It's an unfinished project. psychoanalysis, but which I suppose is in part to set up conditions for one's unconscious to speak itself in the presence of another.
How has the I think I know a little bit about this in our talk before, but how has the reaction been to this book?
I don't really know because I don't know what it's like for other writers, but I don't I don't hear much from the world after I
Oh,
write.
okay.
Yeah, I don't. I rarely get reviewed, so it's not like the reviews are out there and coming. I doubt this is going to get reviewed at all.
I thought that you got some mail about it. No, I thought you said that you got some hate mail about it or something like that.
Oh, that. No, well, that's on Amazon. Uh,
Oh, I see. The
yeah,
reviews
that's
on
on Amazon.
Amazon. Right.
Yeah, I didn't know about that until somebody pointed it out to me. And
Oh, that's a terrible thing to read those
yeah,
things.
yeah. Well, I think it's fine that Amazon has reviews and people write them, and fine. But it's kind of like it's like social media. It's like
Yeah.
I've never been in TikTok world. I don't know. I never did. What's the other one now?
You can really let out your anger
Yeah,
and attack and attack and attack. Yeah.
people write crazy things.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, but I don't. I mean, I think psychoanalysts are writing some wonderful things. There are a lot of beautiful. There's incredible productivity in my profession now. And I think, fortunately, we've survived our creation of the gods of psychoanalysis. We beyond Winnicott, Lacan became almost like gods for us, and there are beyond cults, Winnicott cults, Lacan cults, and we worship these people.
Cohort cults.
It's perhaps too harsh a criticism, but I think Freud is an extraordinary thinker, extraordinary dialectical thinker, contradicts himself all over the place. He's hard to worship. Whereas Lacan, Winnicott, Bion are much less complex thinkers than Freud was. They don't contradict themselves the way Freud did. So in a way, Freud brings a conflicted oeuvre to the reader. It's pretty hard to adore Sigmund Freud, to worship him. Hence, there were different Freudian schools because which Freud are you going to pick? But I think with Winnicott, beyond Lacan, extraordinary people, great analysts, they did make important contributions. But I think our worship of them says more about us than about them. Why just not keep on going? Go back to Freud's metapsychology, in my view, still the richest area of ideological productivity. We can add to Freud's metapsychology. We don't have to replace it with something else.
Mm-hmm.
We can and bring things to it. And I hope then develop a psychoanalytical theory that can be shared by psychoanalysts around the world. We don't have to go off into these separate little enclaves, develop our own gods, set up new religions that are competing with the overall genius of the psychoanalytical offering, in my view. And so I hope we can just get on with the writings that people are coming to today. There's an awful lot of very interesting stuff.
Really, yes, I agree.
Unfortunately, no gods, no gods in waiting.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, I think yourself, Ogden, Adam Phillips, who I would add Jonathan Lear, Jessica Benjamin, Julie Kristeva, but yeah, a lot of them are not. They're not gods. That's a good point.
They're writers. I would say they're good writers. I don't know all of their works, but they're good writers, and they don't hopefully take themselves too seriously, and they're not building movements around themselves.
Right.
And I think it's good. And there's so much being written now by people that's I wish I had the time to read them.
Right.
I don't.
Right. Well, Christopher Bollas, it was really a great pleasure to speak with you today about this book. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciated it.
It's been an honor to speak with you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.